Ever tried managing cloud costs and felt like you were stuck in a game? Well, you're not alone. There's strategy, some luck, and if we're honest, a few surprise fees hiding behind every door. Cloud spend is getting harder to control. The stakes are only getting higher, and the rules, well, they're changing fast. You'll hear from leaders who are optimizing smarter, automating faster, and turning FinOps from just cost-cutting to a competitive edge. And this is how they're flipping the script. We've packed this summit with sessions to help you take control of the board and own it. So let's get a better view.
Hello and welcome to the second annual FinOps Excellence Summit by Harness. We have the opening keynote. My name is Ravi. I lead Cloud Cost Management at Harness, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Tracy Wu from Forrester. Tracy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So Tracy, I know anyone in FinOps already knows who you are, but maybe the topic for today in the Cloudopoly theme is the rent is too high, cutting costs on cloud real estate. And I'm really excited to talk to you about that. But first, can we start with a quick introduction of your role at Forrester and what brought you to FinOps in your journey?
Sure. I'm Tracy Wu, Principal Analyst at Forrester. I'm one of the main cloud analysts there. And I spend the most of my time covering FinOps. I also cover other areas, hybrid cloud, industry, cloud verticals, retail, healthcare, as well as cloud platform teams, cloud skills, and cloud governance. What brought me to FinOps is I inherited the coverage. So I came into it and I didn't know much about it and quickly realized that it is this very exciting burgeoning space, and I'm very lucky to be coming in at the time that I am.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And to kick things off, at Harness, our approach typically from an offering and capability standpoint always has automation at its core, right? Particularly with one of our binary differentiators being the optimization side of things, on top of visibility and governance. But let's start with talking about why is the rent so high? Typically, what are the reasons why companies end up having to deal with these ballooning cloud costs?
So I guess the original statement was the hyperscalers had said, cloud is cheaper. You only pay for what you need. And we quickly realized that is not the case. And the reason why it's not the case is because cloud is not like on-prem or a data center where it is a sunk cost, it is predictable, you know what you're paying for. With cloud, it is this endless, infinite spigot of cloud services. And it only turns off when you tell it to turn off. And so the real issue is, and especially when you're implementing automation, is you can automate all of the spend that you want. There may be situations where you are spending and spending and spending, and you have no realization that you're doing that. And there can be instances where you run some automated process, and then you come back over the weekend and realize that you've blown 80% of your budget for the month. So I think that's a big part of it. The reason why people will spend despite that is because they have access to all of these innovation services, all of these new and unusual infrastructure capabilities. And so the goal is less about let's keep our costs lower than data center, but more about how can we use cloud as an innovation, as an acceleration for transformation. So organizations are willing to pay a bit more to a lot more for cloud. However, that doesn't mean that they're not going to spend responsibly.
with the, like you said, with the move from data center to the cloud, it's always the balance between like the freedom for innovation versus like, keeping a check on costs as well. So sort of related, let's also talk about commitments, right? So whether it's like RIs and savings plans or CUDs and SUDs, or even EAs, EDPs, PPAs, like those are really great tools for companies to save on costs in exchange for long-term commitment. But how do they strike the balance between like deriving the benefits in terms of savings and also not overcommitting for spend that they won't utilize?
Right. So for RIs reservations, you have this area of 1 year, 3 year, and in some cases 5-year commitments. My recommendation is if you are first getting into this space and you don't have some extra consultancy service to be able to analyze whether this makes sense for you, is to only do a 1-year commitment. Yeah. Because the problem is that if you commit to a certain amount of spend and you don't end up using it, it means that you are still on the hook for paying for it. So the thing that I would say is start slowly. Yeah. Look at services that are predictable, that are not volatile, that are not dynamic, and go from there. Ultimately, you do want to go to probably around 75-80% coverage with some sort of commitment. And we're talking about your RIs, your savings plan, your CUDs. The EDP and the PPA is something that you negotiate upfront. And the goal is to really get as low or as high of a discount as you can. You can't always do that, and then you also have a certain amount of committed spend that you must fulfill. There are ways around this where if you know that you're not going to hit the mark, you can perhaps use that to exchange credits for, like, say, Azure. They'll give you credits for using M365 or O365, or you can translate that cost to, say, using a SaaS marketplace. Yeah. But the goal is to really not commit to more than you have. So my recommendation is really commit to about your predicted 80 to 90% spent, and then go from there.
Realistic coverage and sort of being conservative, realistic in the commitments, maybe with some automation as well. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, taking a step back a little bit, like, in terms of like how FinOps has evolved over the last 12 months, like, from the genesis, our approach from a harness standpoint, sort of given our DevOps nature, has been the sort of shift left of FinOps, right? So empowering engineering, making FinOps a part of engineering culture, and also offering comprehensive tooling with sort of AI native automation at the core. And we've started to see some of those things play out. Like, over the last 12 months, how have you seen FinOps evolve in general?
So the talk about shift left has been around. We've really seen the shift left narrative accelerate probably within the last 1.5 to 2 years. Yeah. And where you are actually seeing tooling that can provide recommendations, where maybe at time of provisioning, in the developer environment, which has been very cool to see, and be able to make those recommendations or provide guardrails, whether they are explicit or hidden, to make the best practices the easiest way to go for the engineer and for the developer. Some of the things that I thought was really interesting that I didn't necessarily think would come to pass quite so early is the automation aspect of it, and especially automation within prod environments. Yeah. And I see this more and more and more, and a willingness to do this more and more and more, especially within a Kubernetes environment where you're not necessarily disrupting your configuration environments as well. And that's been wild to me. I see lots of practices being willing to take on that area, especially also within a non-prod environment as well. That's just one part of it. We've seen some evolution where it's the shift left narrative, but then there's also the shift right narrative as well, where there's this demand for executives to be able to provide visualization to show cost avoidance. Because if your cloud spend is increasing, and let's say you're in the hundreds of millions of dollars especially, how can you prove that your FinOps practice is working if your cloud spend keeps on increasing? And so there is this need for more business intelligence tools or more business intelligence capability integrated within our cloud cost management practices.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, you brought up a really valid point of like typically non-production environments, people are more willing to experiment, like even like some of the riskier strategies from an optimization standpoint. And we've absolutely seen that expand now, like to people being a lot more open even to production environments. And and the implication with that is like now the sort of surface area that we can cover is a lot more, like given that 60-70% typically is the production spend in a typical scenario, right? And also like the next topic is sort of related to what you brought up on the shift, right? Like, executives asking for more visibility on like the overall spend and so on. And so like, we've recently seen the evolution of the definition of FinOps from just meaning the public clouds and Kubernetes to also now include data center costs and like, SaaS costs and so on. How do you see that trend?
That has been a very distinct change. And I started to see that within the client questions that I got at the end of Q4. And this year, for some reason, it just turned on a dime. Yeah. And almost every single question I get has been about how do we measure our total cost of ownership? I think the idea of FinOps covering SaaS was something that my clients had assumed. They said that the cloud was SaaS. Right. And there was this sort of walking back that I had to do. Well, FinOps is really cloud infrastructure services. There are some movement to cover that SaaS cost. Now there is demand to not only cover your SaaS costs, your PaaS costs, but also your on-prem costs. And as AI use cases get stood up, also your AI costs as well. Yeah. And even interestingly enough, also labor is getting factored into that as well. Yeah. Which is just wild to me because FinOps, it's this amoeba that keeps on growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just keeps on swallowing the world whole. It'll be pretty interesting to see how it expands into other areas of like ITFM, TBM. Where is it going into your company finances as well? And it's a really exciting time for FinOps.
And like at Harness, like we take a very active role in the FinOps community in general, but also in specific with the FinOps Foundation, for example. And I've also recently had the opportunity to be on the governing board. And one of the key topics is similar to what you're describing, right? Like this evolution of like calling it from cloud to cloud plus. And I really like the analogy of like this amoeba that's growing, right? Like consuming more things. So let's talk about the sort of human aspect or the practical human aspect of this growth. Like, historically we've gone from like a few years ago, like people, if somebody's in FinOps asking like, what is FinOps, to like today, it's not just like one part of somebody's chart or somewhere, but you actually have, for the most part, like for the larger companies, dedicated practices, dedicated teams, that are dedicated to this function of FinOps. And so it becomes not just a viable, but a really great opportunity as a career for like practitioners. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I got a comment from someone that I connected on LinkedIn, and they said, oh, it's so interesting. Everyone has only been in FinOps for a few years. And it's like, well, FinOps has only been around for a few years. And it used to be sort of this part-time role with cloud admin or cloud operations engineer. But as cloud spend starts to increase, and we've seen something, it could be 30, 40% of IT budgets, then it becomes a real viable role where you need a dedicated FinOps practice, you need a dedicated FinOps individual. And what you see from the foundation is that all of these certifications are coming out because of that, just to make sure that if you want to enter this space, that you have at least the requisite knowledge to do that. And from that, we've seen more and more FinOps roles coming up, more and more FinOps profiles coming out, which is actually why we have a role profile report that is within FinOps, because people are trying to hire specifically for this role. And because of that, it's become a real viable career path for people that want to go into that.
And we've definitely seen that as well. It's gone from like, what is FinOps to like, hey, do you have referrals for like good FinOps people? So it's absolutely been an evolution. And so, like, let's come to everybody's favorite topic, right? Like using AI for FinOps.
Yep.
Now, from an approach standpoint, like we have we have a few different areas that we look at, like be it like with an MCP integration for a FinOps agent, but the use cases are sort of a few, like for example, being able to use Gen AI to create complex entities, whether like the YAML rules for governance or like dashboard visualization tiles using simple language prompts, or to be able to explain things in natural language that are actually otherwise complex, like the causative reasons for like a cost spike anomaly and things like that. What have you seen as the more powerful use cases for using AI for FinOps initiatives today, and like where do you see that going?
The AI for FinOps is still very nascent. The use cases that I've seen are lots of chatbots. So I think the reason for it is, one, it's easier to implement, but also two, it democratizes the tooling interaction capabilities. Because at first it was a dashboard that was really for FinOps roles. Engineers didn't really want to interact with it. Your executive team doesn't necessarily know how to use it. And your non-technical folks also didn't necessarily know how to use it, weren't necessarily wanting to do that. You have now seen the executive, the non-technical folks being able to interact with these solutions because you have these natural language prompts to say, bring me up reports, show me why this anomaly happened, give me next steps for why this might be, prioritize the actions in terms of remediation that I should be putting in this. Where should I be putting automation, and where is this not necessarily a good idea to do so? So those sort of AI and providing context and making it easier to use the solution has been a big part of AI for FinOps. The really interesting areas is like what you were saying with using MCP and being able to access different large language models to be able to provide different contexts for what you're doing with, even say ingesting that billing or ingesting recommendations for different models that you should be using. Where it should go, I think it has so much more potential. I think we are at the very tip of the iceberg, maybe at the first 1% to 2%. Where I would want generative AI to go for FinOps would be to enter into all of these different areas, make it much more context aware and intent aware. So there are things like if you look at cloud unit cost economics, that is an area that everyone is trying to explore and has been around for a few years, but it has been difficult to implement. And the reason why it's been difficult to implement is because it's very specific to the workflow. And so it's difficult to purchase something off the shelf to do that, because you need to understand your business strategy, your cloud strategy, the intent behind this, why are you using cloud spend, or why are you trying to optimize it, and then identify the right unit cost at different layers of granularity to be able to build out some sort of margin analysis for, if we spend this amount here, if we optimize here, is it going to actually help us to achieve our business targets? That's a huge stretch that no one has really been able to achieve across different practices, even across different layers of maturity as much as they can. With generative AI, what if you could identify those unit costs? Because you don't want to drown in unit costs in all of these different areas. You don't want to get into this analysis paralysis. You also don't want to be identifying the wrong unit costs, because it may not tell you anything. And so what if you had ones that said, for these specific applications, or for this specific type of routine, or if you're calling up this function or this library, that this is the area where you should be measuring the cost for. All the way to if you are looking at, say, users that are interacting with your website, for each individual that accesses the website, how much is that cloud spend? And if you can identify unit costs at different layers of granularity with your generative AI without having to do a whole practice behind this would be really incredible. And that's really the goal of FinOps, is to maximize the value of the investment for cloud. And if you are able to tie specific actions for cloud spend to all the way to creating new revenue streams, creating more profitability, that would be really incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, you called out a really important point of, like, one part of the power of using AI for FinOps initiatives moving forward is to automate some of the application, the operationalization, but also, to your point, like, it's the discovery of that opportunity itself. Like, even if you take unit costs, for example, based on all of the ingested metrics, based on the cloud spend, based on the sort of nature or industry of the customer, what are those metrics to track, and like what are those formulas, and then doing it in an automated way. And, like, it's a similar thing even from an automation standpoint, like auto-identifying the different opportunities for optimization and then going ahead and implementing them.
Yeah. The automation portion of it is sort of next layer, because you have the automation right now.
Yeah.
And so the trust behind automation for cloud services is there, but it's not fully there.
Yeah.
And so what if you could use generative AI to build that trust, to be able to identify specific areas of automation, or to make or to automate more different areas? Because the goal of FinOps is really to automate as much as you can.
Yep.
That's what mature FinOps practices do. In the beginning, you don't really want to do that. You don't necessarily know what your cloud spend is. You don't know which cloud service you're going to use. But as you mature within your cloud journey, you mature within your FinOps practice, you do want to start injecting more and more automation. And generative AI can help inform that, ostensibly, in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, generative AI informed automation, like, that's where sort of like the real power is. Absolutely. Now let's talk about the other way, right? Like, so implementing FinOps principles for AI consumption, like, be it like things like calls of like APIs, using the right models, or even in terms of the underlying infrastructure that's like powering that AI consumption. This is, of course, like, starting to become more mainstream, and it's an area that we are looking at closely as well. Like, what would you say are sort of the key use cases, and where do you see the market going from this standpoint?
So FinOps principles are pretty universal for different areas. We're talking about individual accountability, cross-functional collaboration, timely and accurate data decision making. All of that gets accelerated and becomes even further underscored, because I don't need to tell you, I think everyone that is looking at AI costs already understands AI costs will go up exponentially. We're not there yet. And actually, it was really interesting at X, I was talking to some of the biggest practices, and they said the same thing. They said, I'm really surprised we don't have as high of an AI cost as we expected to. It was something around 1% to 2% of their spend, which is wild to me. But also our own Forrester data also says that as well, which is, average AI spend is $440K. Whereas if we're looking at average enterprise IT budgets, it's $562 million.
Yeah.
So the scale of it is small right now, but in 2 to 3 years, it's going to hit us like a freight train.
Yep.
And FinOps teams need to be ready to catch that. So when you're looking at the specific principles behind this, there'll be things like the collaboration part of it is already happening, because your FinOps teams don't necessarily understand all of the different levers that you need for AI costs. Like, now you're having to do with token selection, inference, caching, understanding throughput, understanding model selection, understanding latency. All of those different things have different cost levers. And actually, we have a report that's looking at those AI costs as well, so a little plug for the report out there. But that has made this area where FinOps teams need to train up on. And so they've been collaborating with data teams or business teams that are handling the AI costs locally right now. And that collaboration needs to happen a lot more cross-functionally, because your data and AI teams need to inform them of, well, these are all the other AI cost levers that you need to be thinking about. For individual accountability, if your cloud spend can skyrocket in a way that was traditional cloud spend isn't accelerating at, then the guardrails behind this and the allocation and responsibility behind this need to be more and more accountable. And because the cloud spend or your AI spend can accelerate far, far faster than what you have right now, you need data and timely and accurate decision making to be able to turn on a dime, Does this make sense? Should we be throttling this spend? We need to be forecasting sooner, more accurately, into perhaps 6 months, 18 months into an area where you can really understand, what is my budget? What should it be? All of these different areas of accountability, of timely decision making, of cross-functional collaboration, all of these pillars need to be happening much more, and there needs to be more emphasis on this. And the difficulty behind this is that there's a lot of operationalization or operations that already is being disrupted with FinOps. And with AI costs, it will be even more disruptive. So as a FinOps team, you need to get ready. And you need to make sure that you have all of these principles laid down, at least in a strong foundational way, where everyone's buying in, where this is baked into daily meetings, where this is baked into standardized taxonomies, where you have centralized dashboards, you have the ability to be able to make these decisions on the fly.
So basically, it's like growing but still nascent. We're waiting for that sort of significant spike to happen, but good for FinOps teams to sort of stay ahead of the curve.
Not just good.
Critical.
If they get to a point where their spend has all of a sudden skyrocketed, your executive team is going to say, this was happening. Where have you been? And they're going to be on the hook for this. It's not just the FinOps team, it's your CIO or your CTO that's going to look really bad. And so this preparation needs to be happening now.
And similar to that, like what are the other areas that are sort of critical for FinOps teams to stay ahead of the curve? Like where do you see the market growing, let's say like 2-3 years down the line?
2 or 3 years down the line. Well, we've already started to see this already, this total cost of ownership that's happening.
Yeah.
And we've seen this with the expansion of focus with SaaS and PaaS costs, with AI costs. Well, that was already an expectation, but also on-prem costs. Because people will say, oh, why FinOps for on-prem? It's already sunk costs. All we need to measure is data center, some depreciation. But there are some very real-time components to on-prem costs, like when should you run the workloads, electricity and power usage, heat transfer modeling, data center footprints, not necessarily within your physical facilities, but what about in a colo? Which rack should you be putting next to each other? All of those different areas require more real-time, more collaboration type accountability, type decision making, which is something that FinOps teams are already built to do.
Yep.
And so the expansion of FinOps and the reason why it's happening is because the ROI is proven. And the executives teams are saying, oh, great, what about all of these other areas? What about tech debt? What about app rationalization? And so it started to expand into asset management with SaaS, the licensing and compliance part of it, not necessarily yet, but we could see that happening. The on-prem side of it, this is already happening, and you see your IT financial management and your TBM teams and your FinOps teams starting to report under the same individual. And where or if they're not reporting under the same individual, they have very tightly integrated and they work very collaboratively with each other. And where you will start to see other areas as well. I've already talked to FinOps practices that are accounting for labor, which is wild to me, because when you look at what are the different areas that are looking at and managing costs, with SaaS is your license and compliance area. With ITFM, really the biggest distinction is labor.
Yeah.
And if your FinOps teams are already reporting on that, and if your IT financial management teams, the biggest practice is reporting on costs for your on-prem side of it. The other thing that they've been charged with like your TBM practices is connecting your IT costs to business initiatives. If FinOps is already doing that, why can't they do those other areas as well? And so if that's starting to happen, a lot of people say, oh, FinOps is financial operations, and that's how you know that they don't know the space, because that's not what it is right now, right? It's finance plus DevOps.
Yeah.
But what if FinOps could be financial operations? Because you've already seen IT costs become a bigger and bigger part of the company budget. And it's become this sort of enabling backbone for business transformation. So if your IT initiatives are starting to power your digital transformation initiatives and starting to power where your business is going and what revenue streams and products it should be delivering, then your IT strategy or your IT costs will start to drive your finance costs. And so where FinOps could actually become your financial operations and have a big part and say within the finance side of it itself. So I think that's very future. Probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years from now, but I do think that it's going in that direction. In the meantime, it'll start to expand into these other areas. And where I see the biggest area beyond the SaaS side, beyond the on-prem side of it, is really in this tech debt side of it, which sits adjacent to it, where FinOps teams are involved with it, but now they're being charged to do that, where they're being asked, what about our on-prem apps? Should we be decommissioning them? Should we be trying to consolidate them? And they've been able to actually bring together different teams, like your procurement teams, your different business teams, that weren't necessarily working with each other. And now they've been able to bring that together. I actually talked to one FinOps practice where they said that they were able to do app rationalization, something that was taking 6 months, they did in 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
Because they are used to this cross-functional collaboration.
Yeah.
They already have the relationships behind this. They already have the muscle to be able to pull these individuals and folks together. And they already have the ability to process that amount of data. And so they have been charged with on-prem app rationalization, and I see that more and more and more. And actually, I'm keynoting for our Forrester Technology Innovation Summit, so little plug there. There's one in EMEA, beginning of October. There's another one in Austin, beginning of November. But that's going to be one of the things that we'll be talking about as well, is where does FinOps and ITFM, the overall financial management of your IT solutions, play into with tech debt, and how does that inform that, and how does it drive that process, and does it mean that your practices are actually starting to drive that area as well?
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that's a fascinating point that you made. That it's this whole function has proven ROI, and all of the principles and the operationalization of those principles is actually cross-cutting in its relevance to all of these different areas, because this team has the ability to ingest that kind of data, track that kind of data, act on it. They have the organizational structure and the influence to make some of these changes. So it becomes like such a no-brainer to expand this to all of these different areas from a scope standpoint. So that's fantastic. So we've gone from cloud to cloud plus, and it sounds like there are more pluses coming.
Many pluses.
Fantastic. So Tracy, we started with talking about some of the common causes for ballooning cloud costs within organizations, about commitments, how FinOps has evolved over the last 12 months, AI for FinOps, FinOps for AI, and the where you see the market going in the next 2 to 3 years, maybe 10 years as well. And I'm sure all of these insights have been invaluable for our audience. So thank you so much again for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. And with that, thank you all for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the rest of the summit. See you next time.